recognize. So like, let's make sure that we're really analyzing all this new data that's coming in on like how people are viewing things, what's making them tune out and when, and all this kind of stuff. So you kind of start to like overthink things. And again, like with Netflix as well, it's like at the very beginning, the mentality really was like, let's go straight to series. We don't need to spend a ton of time in development. I mean, luckily, a title like, things were pretty good in the early days when there weren't like a bazillion shows quite yet, but like, you'd have a project like House of Cards that, David Fincher already, when David Fincher and at the time Kevin Spacey and came to kind of pitch the project, from what I've heard, like all the scripts had already been written, all the material was already there. So it was like, all right, well, we gotta go. We gotta keep things going. You already have these great people attached. It's David Fincher. Like, let's just get it going. And I think this is kind of more of the mentality that you kind of find on licensing teams and licensed original teams. And to kind of define that a little bit, you have licensing, which is just kind of like picking up projects that are done from other platforms. So you have a team that kind of just like doesn't necessarily look at projects as creatively. They're just kind of looking more at like the numbers of how projects have done, and they're kind of putting them on the platform. There's another type of team called like licensed originals, which is kind of the world that I was in when I was on the Africa team, where you're kind of doing a less heavy lift on projects, and kind of what it was on the nonfiction series team as well, where it was kind of like finding these opportunities, like the most famous title I think that came out of the team that I was working on when I was on the nonfiction series co-production team is The Last Dance, where it's like, okay, we've got this opportunity to get rest of the world rights for this show, The Last Dance. We won't get the US to premiere, but for the rest of the world it'll be a Netflix show, so like it's going to be kind of low touch. This makes sense for our strategy. It makes sense for where we're at right now. So you're not as like overthinking in the weeds like the owned original nonfiction team is. Does that make sense? So you're kind of just looking at it as like, all right, this bet makes sense, so let's not overthink things. This creator knows what they're doing. Let's let them do what they do best, and let's support them, and let's give them feedback based off of what we're kind of seeing works on the platform. I think that's the kind of like, for the creator, it seems to be like maybe the most optimal relationship to have, and I think that ends up leading to the most hits. And I have to shout out one of the bosses that I had, or I guess my main boss on the Africa team, who came from a much more programming background. So we looked at these literally as like, he would look at it as like a bet on your portfolio, right? So instead of being super in the weeds on like 4 owned original titles that have much bigger budgets, we were able to kind of just like from a strategic view kind of say like, okay, with where we're at in the market and the economics of this project, this works out, let's go with it, right? So I think that's in general a better approach. And like, you do find that there's always like a lot of really great shows that were, and again, my background is at Netflix, so like there were a lot of great shows that Netflix kind of picked up and then kind of like made a lot bigger. And I think a lot of the times streamers can kind of forget like the power just of that, of like taking something from like a Cineflix or whatever, like a smaller platform, being like, oh, like this is great. Like I think that what was that Jessica Alba show that was like kind of like an action cop show? I can't think of the name right now, but like there was a show like that I think was on DirecTV. Shout out Zach Speed. I think you were working there maybe at that time that was coming out. And then it was just like, all right, like put it on a bigger platform. It already has great auspices, and like let's just make this kind of like bigger, right? So I'm saying that to say that like a lot of overthinking comes in development already, especially when a company is a little bit kind of further along, I guess, in its life cycle as a streamer or a network, or a studio is a little bit further along. Then it's kind of like we gotta protect this brand. Maybe we didn't have a great year last year. Maybe the last quarter wasn't that great, and you feel like the boss breathing down your neck a little bit. Like you guys need to have a hit, and like maybe jobs are going to be lost or blah blah blah. So there's that kind of like doing it from a place of fear rather than doing it from a place of like, all right, let's just take a deep breath. What value can we actually add to this show? And how do we approach this in a way that's not just going to like freak out the creative community because they feel like we keep canceling stuff. And, sometimes you're in a market where there's not that many other buyers, and there's not like agents and managers who can kind of be savvy and kind of walk the producers back from the ledge. I'm sure a lot of producers that are listening to this are nodding like, yeah, it's super annoying when like things are in what we call development hell. And they're just like, and on the film side, a lot of the time when you watch somebody giving an awards speech for like an Oscar, they'll be like, yeah, I wrote this script back in 2005. I think famously like Dallas Buyers Club and some of these projects, like they'd been kind of floating around forever, and people just kind of like, yeah, maybe no, maybe not quite. And a lot of the time it can be stuff like, if it's like an LGBTQ subject matter or something like that, maybe there wasn't a time for it. But anyway, I'm just saying that like the overthinking that tends to happen, just want to say this to kind of like the writers out there and producers out there and directors out there who like might be getting frustrated because a project has been stuck in development. It's like, don't take it too personally, because sometimes it just is where the company is in kind of their life cycle of overthinking. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily mean anything about you as a creator or what the excitement was initially. I think sometimes people can be like, oh, these people are so fake. These buyers are so fake. They'll pretend to like your project, and then 3 weeks later, no, sometimes